What is good, everyone? Welcome to this video. I'm Charlie from Conscious Creation, and in this video I would like to share with you how you can go about and manage your dopamine levels, and by managing your dopamine levels, how it can help you create a better life for yourself. I'm also going to share with you how it can help prevent things like that of psychic attacks. I'm going to share with you a personal story from my experience on how I know this to be true, at least for myself. So what is dopamine? Dopamine is the feel-good chemical. So when you achieve something, it acts like that of a reward system, and your body goes, here you go, have some dopamine. If you crush a workout, you release dopamine. If you build something and you are satisfied with what you have built, your body will release this dopamine. The problem with nowadays, though, is we are releasing this dopamine more often than we need to, and it's creating all sorts of problems for us in our society. Things like junk food, pornography, alcohol, social media. What do we do when we're bored? We just scroll through that of social media, and it starts to release more and more dopamine within the body. Now, when this dopamine is released, it starts to wire our brain for instant gratification. And we end up becoming lazy because we're like, where's the next dopamine hit? What can give me that next rush? And we start creating bad habits for ourselves in our lives. So let's say, for example, you have some junk food or you watch pornography and it makes you feel good. You have told your brain that you do not need to do anything in order to get this reward hit within your body. Let's say you then play 3 hours of video games. You are burning out your dopamine receptors, and it's going to start causing you all sorts of internal issues for yourself. Things like social anxiety. You're going to feel unmotivated, more lethargic. Me, I come from a personal training background. I used to train a lot of clients, and one of the first questions that I would ask a client who came up to me is I would ask, are you overstimulated in any area of your life? Do you have too much stress, too much alcohol, too much fast releasing sugar, things like candy bars and fizzy drinks? We'll take those for example. If you have a candy bar or a fizzy drink, what happens is you get something called an insulin spike. So in other words, you get this surge of energy, you're all hyper, and then you crash and burn, and then you need another pick-me-up. You have another candy bar, you have another Red Bull, but your body's on this internal state, this flux of going up and down, and your body finds it very difficult to burn fat, to build muscle, to be functionally healthy, because it's always trying to rebalance itself to get it back to that homeostasis from these insulin spikes that you were giving it. So you have that insulin spike, we go up, we get all hyper, we crash, and then we need another pick-me-up. The same happens to us with dopamine. If we are consistently releasing too much dopamine in our lives, we're going to find it very difficult to create the things that we want in our life. So we want to manage our dopamine so we can become more centered and therefore go towards and create the things that we want in our lives. So let's say we have our stick man or stick woman here. Now around them we have the astral field. Now this astral field represents our energy, and the more energy we have, we're going to find it easier to create the things that we want in our lives. But what if our energy is getting siphoned away from us due to this dopamine hit? So let's say, for example, you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is you check your phone. You want to see what's going on social media. You check your emails. You have that fast releasing sugar. Now, I'm not saying don't do these things. Don't check your phone. Don't check your emails. Of course, you need to do that. But you need to ask yourself, are you doing it out of impulse? Do you need to do it? Are you doing it for the sake of doing it? Or are you consciously doing it? Because if you're not, you need to change your relationship to it if you want to better manage that of your dopamine levels. This is why people struggle so much with things like that of meditation, because when they're meditating and their brain's so used to this dopamine, it's like, where's the dopamine? Where's the dopamine? And we can't sit still and relax. So I'm going to share with you a story of how this actually affects us on a much deeper level through that of psychic attacks. Now, the story might sound a little bit woo-woo, and I would agree to it if it had not happened to me myself. So when we are consistently releasing this dopamine, it starts to alter our brain chemistry. And as it alters our brain chemistry, the field becomes more shrunk. And as the field becomes more shrunk, we start creating holes in our energy field. Now, if we have these holes in our energy field, it is much easier for non-benevolent beings to come into our energy field and start affecting us on a personal level. So often we think our thoughts are our thoughts, but what if they're not? What if it's this non-benevolent being simply planting thoughts into our mind and we think that they are ours? Have you ever had that experience of, oh, I just have another drink, and then you have 10 too many? Or you just have another slice of pizza, you end up eating the whole thing? Or I'll just continue this addictive behavior. No one will notice. A lot of the time, those thoughts are not actually our thoughts. Now, I did a healing course last year, and during this healing course, I believe it was on the second day, is we did this group meditation. And as we were in this group meditation, I remember the frequency and the energy in the room started to rise really, really high. And I started to go on my own internal journey in this meditation. And I remember being guided to this big silver room. Now, in this big silver room, there was a north, south, east, and west, and there were beams of light coming in through these places, pointing to the center of the room. And in this meditation, I was guided to the center of this room that had this big silver basin. And something said to me, pop your head in the silver basin. So I did that. And as I did that, I got this really hot, prickly feeling on the top part of my forehead, as if someone had put a hot rod there. And then something said to me, focus on your pineal gland, which is a gland in the center of your head. And I got this flash of internal white light on my inner vision. And I remember opening my eyes and my whole body was shaking violently. My arms were shaking, my legs were shaking. The next thing I know is I'm on the floor, shaking. And my chest is doing this weird movement as if being pulled up by a piece of string. And this went on for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then when it ended, I went up to the facilitators. They were helping me out through this process. I said, what was going on there? And they said, oh, we were helping remove this being, this parasite from your body. And I remember the feeling after it as if I had just taken off a really heavy rucksack I'd been carrying around with me for a very long time.
Eddie? What was that?
Oh, I have a parasite.
Now, this is one of the things that I help people with when I facilitate with a healing. I help people remove these parasites, these non-benevolent beings. They end up feeling so much lighter, calmer, and happier because of it. But if we continue these addictive behaviors, like the consistent release of dopamine, we are going to continue to have a weakened energy field, which still allows these beings to come into our space. So as we go through this process, we want to manage our dopamine levels better. And you want to ask yourself why you want to do this, because we're wired for pleasure. If we have a choice out of pain or pleasure, we're more often than not going to choose the pleasure, right? So when we have that dopamine hit, we get that good feeling, but then we crash. So the why is we are going to replace that with the long-term pleasure. It's what Tony Robbins talks a lot about. He says, people think I'm the motivational guy, but he says, I'm the why guy. Why do you want to do something? And if we replace that short-term pleasure with that long-term pleasure, the why becomes much more reasonable. So let's say, for example, we've got a caveman and he's building himself a hut or a house, and he doesn't get any major dopamine hits through this process. He's gradually building his house. He eventually gets to the point where it is completed and he gets this big rush of dopamine. Congratulations, the body says to him. And because he didn't have these dopamine spikes a lot during the process, and he was able to stay more centered and focused on creating and building that house, the long-term payoff, the long-term pleasure is he can now look after his family. They've got shelter, they've got warmth, they've got safety. In the same way, we can apply that in our lives. If we manage to stay more centered and control and be more conscious of our dopamine release, we can now use that energy to create better relationships in our lives. We can create a better business for ourselves, more abundance, and that is the long-term pleasure of controlling our dopamine levels. But as you go through this process of managing your dopamine and cutting things out, is you want to do it through a gradual process and be somewhat realistic about it, because let's say you have lots of alcohol or lots of fast releasing sugar or a lot of cup of coffee, is you want to do it very gradually, because if you do it all of a sudden, it's going to be quite a shock for your system. So let's take coffee, for example. Let's say you have 10 cups of coffee a day. Now, I know that's extreme, but what you would want to do is you would want to cut out 1 cup of coffee per week. Now, after 9-10 weeks, you'll only be on 1 cup of coffee and your dopamine levels will be much more centered. So thank you for watching. Peace. Take care.